The wind didn't howl in the North Ridge territory. It screamed. Ethan Hale had grown used to it over the 3 years he'd been living in the cabin, a crooked structure of timber and tar paper that sat wedged between two granite slopes like a rotten tooth. The roof leaked. The door didn't shut right. The stove smoked more than it heated. But it was his, and more importantly, it was far away from everyone else. He stood at the window now, watching the snow fall in thick sideways sheets. The storm had been building since dawn, and by mid-afternoon the world outside had turned into a churning wall of white. You couldn't see 10 feet past the porch. That was fine by Ethan. The less he saw, the less he had to think about. He turned back to the stove, poured himself another cup of coffee that tasted like burned tree bark, and sat down at the table. His hands were steady. They'd been steady for 3 years. Steady because they hadn't touched a scalpel, hadn't held a needle, hadn't made a single cut into human flesh since the day he walked away from the field hospital in Virginia, the day he killed a man he was supposed to save. Ethan pushed the thought away like he always did, burying it under the rhythm of his breathing, the crackle of the stove, the monotonous whine of the wind. He had a system. Wake up, chop wood, boil water, eat whatever dried meat or canned beans were left in the cupboard, read the same 3 books he owned. Sleep. Repeat. It wasn't a life. It was a routine designed to keep him from thinking, and it had worked, until today. The sound came around 4 o'clock, cutting through the wind like a blade. A scream. Ethan froze, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. He set it down slowly, listening. The wind could play tricks on you out here. It could sound like voices, like crying, like laughter. He'd heard it all before. But this, there it was again. Faint, desperate, human. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and moved to the window. Nothing but white. He pulled on his coat, his boots, wrapped a scarf around his face, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit him like a fist. The wind tore at his clothes, tried to shove him back inside. He grabbed the railing and squinted into the storm. Help! Somebody, please! There, south, maybe a quarter-mile down the slope. Ethan's jaw tightened. He should go back inside, lock the door. Let the storm swallow whatever poor fool had wandered out into it. That wasn't his problem anymore. He didn't save people. He didn't get involved. That was the whole point of being out here. But his legs were already moving. He grabbed the lantern from the hook by the door, lit it, and started down the slope. The snow was knee-deep and getting deeper. Each step was a fight. The wind shoved him sideways, tried to steal the breath from his lungs. He kept the lantern low, searching for tracks, for movement, for anything. Then he saw it. A wagon. Or what was left of one. It had flipped. The axle snapped clean in half. The whole thing tilted at a sickening angle against a boulder the size of a bear. One of the wheels was still spinning slowly in the wind. Supplies were scattered everywhere. Crates, blankets, a broken rifle. And pinned beneath the wagon's frame, half buried in snow, was a woman. Ethan ran. Hey, can you hear me? She didn't answer. Her face was turned away, her hair matted with snow and blood. One arm was flung out at an odd angle, the other trapped beneath her body. Her coat was torn open, and even from 5 feet away, Ethan could see the dark stain spreading across her side. He dropped to his knees beside her, set the lantern down, and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse. Weak, but there. All right, he muttered, mostly to himself. All right, you're not dead yet. He grabbed the edge of the wagon and pulled. It didn't budge. He set his feet, braced his shoulder against the frame, and shoved with everything he had. The wood groaned. The wagon shifted an inch, 2 inches. Not enough. The woman's eyes fluttered open. Don't, Ethan said quickly. Don't move. You're stuck. I'm going to get you out, but you need to stay still. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Shock. Blood loss. Maybe both. Ethan looked around, scanning the wreckage. There. A length of iron rod, part of the wagon's frame. He grabbed it, jammed it under the wagon, and used it as a lever. Come on, you piece of... The wagon lifted. 6 inches. A foot. Ethan's arm shook, his boots slipping in the snow. He wedged a rock under the rod to hold it in place, then ducked under the frame and grabbed the woman by the shoulders. "This is going to hurt," he said. He pulled. She screamed. Ethan dragged her out from under the wagon, and the moment she was clear, the rod slipped. The wagon crashed back down, missing his leg by inches. He didn't stop. He hauled her away from the wreckage, laid her flat on the snow, and ripped open her coat. The wound was bad. A jagged piece of metal, probably part of the wagon's fittings, had driven itself into her left side, just below the ribs. It was still in there, a twisted shard of iron sticking out like a broken bone. Blood pulsed around it in slow, steady pulses. If he pulled it out, she'd bleed out in minutes. If he left it in, she'd die from internal bleeding or infection. Ethan's hands hovered over the wound. "Do it. You know what to do." "No. No, I don't. Not anymore." "You do. You've done this 100 times, and I killed him. I killed him because I thought I knew what I was doing. She's dying. Right now, in front of you." Ethan's hands were shaking. "Please." The word was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. The woman was looking at him, her eyes half closed, her lips blue. She wasn't begging, she was just asking, like she knew he was the only chance she had. Ethan closed his eyes, took a breath, opened them again. "All right," he said. "All right. But I need you to stay awake, you hear me? Stay awake." He worked fast. He had no surgical tools, no anesthesia, no sterile environment. What he had was a hunting knife, a bottle of whiskey, and 3 years of trying to forget how to do this. He poured the whiskey over the blade, over his hands, over the wound. The woman gasped, her body arcing off the snow. Ethan held her down with one hand. "Stay still." He cut the fabric away from the wound, exposing the full extent of the damage. The metal had punctured the abdominal wall. There was no way to know what it had hit inside: liver, intestines, major vessels. He'd have to open her up to find out. And if he did that out here, in a blizzard, with no proper equipment, she'd die anyway. So he made a choice. He gripped the metal shard, braced his other hand against her side, and pulled. Blood gushed out, hot and dark. Ethan jammed a wad of cloth against the wound, pressing down hard. The woman screamed again, her hands clawing at the snow. He didn't let up. He counted to 10, then 20, waiting for the bleeding to slow. It didn't. "Come on," he hissed. "Come on, clot." He pulled the cloth away, shoved his fingers into the wound, feeling for the source. There. A torn vessel, maybe the inferior epigastric. He pinched it off, held it, and grabbed his knife again. He had no sutures, so he did the next best thing. He heated the blade over the lantern flame until it glowed orange, then pressed it against the vessel. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. The woman passed out. Ethan kept working. He cauterized what he could, packed the wound with strips of cloth soaked in whiskey, and wrapped her torso tight with a length of rope he found in the wreckage. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, but it would hold. For now. He sat back, breathing hard, his hands covered in blood. The woman was still alive. Barely. Her pulse was thready, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. Ethan looked up at the sky. The storm was getting worse, the temperature was dropping. If he left her here, she'd freeze to death in an hour. If he tried to carry her back to the cabin, she might not survive the trip. He looked at his hands again. Steady. "Damn it," he muttered. He gathered what supplies he could salvage, blankets, a canvas tarp, a canteen, and fashioned a crude sled out of the wagon's broken planks. He lifted the woman onto it, wrapped her in the blankets, and tied her down. Then he picked up the rope and started pulling. The cabin was a quarter-mile away. It might as well have been 100. Ethan leaned into the wind, each step a battle. The sled caught on rocks, on roots, on anything the snow decided to hide. He fell twice, the rope cutting into his shoulders, his legs shaking with exhaustion. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Because if he stopped, he'd start thinking about why he was doing this. And if he thought about it too much, he'd leave her in the snow. By the time he reached the cabin, his lungs were on fire and his vision was starting to blur. He kicked the door open, dragged the sled inside, and collapsed against the wall. For a long moment, he just sat there, gasping for breath, staring at the woman lying unconscious on his floor. Then he stood up and got back to work. He stripped off her wet clothes, covered her with dry blankets, and built up the fire until the cabin was almost unbearably hot. He boiled water, cleaned the wound again, redressed it with proper cloth. He checked her pulse every 10 minutes. He monitored her breathing. He did everything he'd been trained to do, everything he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. And somewhere around midnight, she opened her eyes. Where? Her voice was a rasp, barely audible. You're safe, Ethan said. He was sitting in the chair by the stove, his shirt off, washing the blood from his hands in a basin of water. You were in an accident. I brought you back to my place. She tried to sit up. He crossed the room in 2 steps and pushed her back down. Don't. You've got a hole in your side the size of my fist. You move wrong, you'll tear it open. She stared at him, her eyes wide, confused. Then she looked down at herself, at the bandages, at the blood-stained blankets. Her breathing quickened. It's all right, Ethan said, his voice softer. You're going to be all right, but you need to rest. Who are you? Name's Ethan. Did you operate on me? More or less. Out there? In the storm? Didn't have much choice. She closed her eyes, her jaw trembling. I thought I was dead. You almost were. Why did you help me? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know how to. He went back to the basin, finished cleaning his hands, and pulled his shirt back on. When he turned around, she was looking at him again. What's your name? He asked. Clara Whitlock. Well, Clara, you're going to be here for a while. That wound needs time to heal, and the storm's not letting up anytime soon, so get comfortable. I can't stay here. You don't have a choice. You don't understand. They're looking for me. Ethan paused, his hand on the back of the chair. Who's looking for you? Clara's eyes flicked to the window, then back to him. Men. Armed men. They think I stole something. Did you? No. Then why are they after you? She hesitated, her fingers twisting in the blanket. Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. He walked over to the window and looked out. The storm was still raging, the snow piling up against the cabin walls. No one was coming tonight. But tomorrow? The day after? What did you see? He asked. I don't know if I should tell you. You're in my cabin, bleeding all over my floor. I think you owe me that much. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, There's something buried in the woods, something they don't want anyone to find. What kind of something? The kind that gets people killed. Ethan turned to look at her. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. She wasn't lying. She was scared. You should have kept your mouth shut, he said. I didn't say anything. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they decided you were a problem. Yes. Ethan rubbed his face, exhaustion pulling at him like a weight. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his problem. He'd saved her life, and that was more than he should have done. The smart thing, the sane thing, would be to patch her up, point her in the right direction, and let her disappear into the wilderness. But he knew how that would end. How many men? He asked. I don't know, 4, maybe 5. They're from town. Hired guns. And they know you are out here? They were chasing me when the wagon flipped. I don't know if they saw where I went. Ethan walked to the corner of the cabin and pulled a rifle down from the wall. He checked the chamber, then set it by the door. He hadn't fired it in months, but it was clean and loaded, just in case. Get some sleep, he said. We'll figure this out in the morning. What if they come tonight? Then I'll deal with it. Clara stared at him, and for a moment he thought she was going to argue. But she didn't. She just nodded, closed her eyes, and let herself sink back into the blankets. Ethan sat down in the chair by the stove and watched the fire. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Because somewhere out there, in the dark and the snow, men with guns were looking for the woman lying on his floor. And he'd just made himself their enemy. The storm broke 2 days later. Clara spent most of that time drifting in and out of consciousness, her body fighting off infection and blood loss. Ethan changed her bandages twice a day, forced water and broth down her throat whenever she was awake enough to swallow, and kept the fire burning. He didn't talk much. Neither did she. But every time she opened her eyes, she'd look at him like she was trying to figure out if he was real or just some fever dream. On the 3rd morning, she woke up clear-headed. You look like hell, she said. Ethan glanced up from the stove, where he was frying strips of salted pork. Good morning to you, too. I mean it. When's the last time you slept? I sleep. Liar. He didn't argue. He slid the pork onto a plate, added a chunk of stale bread, and brought it over to her. She pushed herself up into a sitting position, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. "Take it slow," Ethan said. She ignored him, tore off a piece of bread, and stuffed it into her mouth. She chewed slowly, her eyes closed, like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Maybe it was. Ethan had no idea how long she'd been running before the accident. "You're a decent cook," she said after a while. "It's pork and bread." Still. She ate in silence, and Ethan went back to the stove. When she was finished, she set the plate aside and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not letting me die." Ethan shrugged. "You're not out of the woods yet. But I will be, because of you." He didn't respond. He turned his attention to cleaning the pan, scrubbing at the grease with a rag. He could feel her watching him. "You're not much of a talker, are you?" she said. "Not really." "Why not?" "Nothing to say." "Everyone's got something to say." "Not me." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "You're running from something." Ethan's hands stilled. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're out here, alone, in the middle of nowhere. People don't do that unless they're running." "Maybe I just like the quiet." "Maybe. Or maybe you're like me." Ethan turned to look at her. "I'm nothing like you." "No?" She leaned back against the wall, her expression unreadable. "You saved my life, Ethan. You dragged me out of a wreck in the middle of a blizzard, operated on me with a hunting knife, and carried me back here. That's not something a man does unless he's trying to prove something. To himself, maybe. Or to whoever he left behind." Ethan set the pan down, his jaw tight. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're a doctor. Or you were." He froze. "How? The way you worked, the way you move, you've done this before. A lot." She paused. "So what happened? Why are you out here instead of in a hospital somewhere?" "That's none of your business." "Maybe not. But you asked me what I saw in the woods. I think that makes us even." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away, walked to the window, and looked out at the snow. The sky was clear now, bright and cold. In a few hours, the men looking for Clara would be able to move again. "I was a surgeon," he said finally, "during the war, field hospital in Virginia. We patched up soldiers, sent them back to the line, patched them up again when they came back. It was brutal, but I was good at it. I saved a lot of lives." He stopped, his hands gripping the windowsill. "There was a soldier," he continued, 19 years old, took shrapnel to the chest. It was deep, close to the heart. I thought I could get it out. I thought I knew what I was doing." He paused. "I was wrong. I nicked an artery. He bled out on the table. I killed him." Clara didn't say anything. "After that," Ethan said, "I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I picked up a scalpel, I saw his face. So I left. Came out here. Figured if I wasn't near people, I couldn't hurt anyone. But you helped me." "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did." Ethan turned to look at her. "What?" "You could have left me there. You could have walked away. But you didn't." She met his eyes. "You chose to save me. That means something. It doesn't change what I did." "No, but it's a start." Before Ethan could respond, a sound cut through the silence. Hoofbeats. Ethan's head snapped toward the window. Clara's face went pale. "They're here," she whispered. Ethan grabbed the rifle and moved to the door. Through the gap in the wood, he could see them, 3 men on horseback riding slow up the slope. They were armed, rifles slung across their backs, pistols on their hips. They stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, their breath misting in the cold air. One of them dismounted. "Ethan Hale!" the man called out. His voice was rough, edged with authority. "We know you've got her in there. Send her out, and we'll leave you in peace." Ethan didn't answer. The man took a step closer. "We don't want trouble, Hale. The girl's a thief. She's got something that doesn't belong to her. We just want it back." "I'm not a thief!" Clara shouted from inside the cabin. The man's eyes narrowed. "There she is? Come on out, girl. Make this easy." Ethan stepped onto the porch, the rifle in his hands. "She's not going anywhere." The man stopped. He looked at Ethan, then at the rifle, then back at Ethan. "You're making a mistake." Wouldn't be the first time. She's lying to you. Whatever she told you, it's not true. She stole from us, and we're taking her back. You got proof of that? The man's jaw tightened. We don't need proof. We've got the law on our side. Funny. I don't see a badge. The other two men dismounted, their hands moving toward their guns. The first man held up a hand, stopping them. Last chance, Hale. Send her out, or we come in and get her. Ethan leveled the rifle. You're welcome to try. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind whistled through the trees, the horses stamped their feet. Then the man smiled, a cold, humorless smile. All right, he said, have it your way. He turned and walked back to his horse. The three of them mounted up, and without another word, they rode back down the slope. Ethan stood on the porch, watching until they disappeared into the trees. Then he went back inside, locked the door, and set the rifle against the wall. Clara was sitting up, her face ashen. They'll be back. I know. With more men. Probably. So what do we do? Ethan sat down in the chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. We find out what you saw, and then we decide if it's worth dying for. Clara stared at him, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. You want me to take you there? To the woods? That's exactly what I'm saying. Are you insane? Those men just threatened to kill us both, and you want to go digging around in the place they're trying to keep secret? Ethan leaned back in the chair, his arms crossed. You said there's something buried out there, something worth killing for. If we're going to have any chance of getting out of this alive, I need to know what it is. And what if it's nothing? What if I was wrong? Then we'll deal with that too. But right now we're sitting ducks. They know you're here. They know I'm protecting you. It's only a matter of time before they come back with enough men to burn this place to the ground. He paused. Unless we give them a reason not to. Clara shook her head, her face pale. You don't understand. These aren't just hired guns. The man who sent them, he owns half the town. The sheriff, the merchants, even the church. If we go after him, we're dead. We're already dead if we do nothing. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Her jaw worked, her eyes darting between him and the door. Finally, she let out a long breath and slumped back against the wall. It's about 3 miles east of here, she said quietly. Near the old mining trail. There's a clearing with a dead oak tree. The ground around it's been disturbed. Fresh dirt, even though the ground's supposed to be frozen. What makes you think something's buried there? Because I saw them digging. 2 weeks ago. I was passing through, looking for work, and I took a shortcut through the woods. I heard voices, so I hid. There were 4 men. They had shovels, lanterns. They were arguing about something, but I couldn't hear what. Then they covered the hole and left. And you didn't think to report it? Clara's laugh was bitter. To who? The sheriff? He was one of them. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You're sure it was him? I'd know that bastard anywhere. He's the one who ran me out of town when I couldn't pay my rent. Told me if I came back, he'd have me arrested for vagrancy. She looked down at her hands. I didn't steal anything, Ethan. I was just trying to survive. Ethan stood and walked to the window. The sun was high now, the snow glittering like broken glass. If they were going to do this, they needed to move fast, before the men came back, before Clara's wound got worse, before he lost his nerve. Can you walk? He asked. Clara blinked. What? Your leg. Can you put weight on it? She looked down at her bandaged side, then back at him. I don't know. I haven't tried. Try now. She pushed herself up, her face twisting with pain. Ethan crossed the room and offered his arm. She took it, her grip tight, and slowly shifted her weight onto her feet. Her left leg buckled immediately, and she gasped, clutching at him. Easy, Ethan said, holding her steady. Don't force it. It's not the leg, she said through gritted teeth. It's the stitches. Every time I move, it feels like I'm tearing open. You probably are. That wound's going to need another week before you should even think about walking. Then how am I supposed to— You're not. I'll go alone. Clara's head snapped up. No, absolutely not. You can barely stand. You think you're going to make it 3 miles through the snow? I'll manage. You'll die. Then I'll die trying. But I'm not letting you walk into that place alone. You don't know what you're looking for. You don't know the terrain. You'll get yourself killed, and then what happens to me? Ethan stared at her. There was fire in her eyes now, burning through the pain and exhaustion. She wasn't backing down. Stubborn didn't even begin to cover it. Fine, he said, but we do this my way. We move slow. We stay quiet. And the second you can't keep up, we turn back. Understood? Clara nodded. Understood. Ethan grabbed his coat from the hook by the door and tossed her a spare. It was too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it was warm and it would keep the wind out. He packed a small bag, rope, a lantern, matches, his hunting knife, and the last of the dried meat. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and checked the revolver tucked into his belt. 6 rounds. It would have to be enough. Ready? He asked. Clara pulled the coat tight around her shoulders. No, but let's go anyway. They stepped out into the cold, and the world hit them like a wall. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the air was so sharp it hurt to breathe. Ethan led the way, breaking a trail through the snow, and Clara followed, one hand pressed against her side, the other clutching a walking stick he'd cut for her. She didn't complain, she didn't ask to stop. She just kept moving, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The first mile was the hardest. The snow was deep, the terrain uneven, and every step sent a jolt of pain through Clara's body. Ethan could see it in the way she moved, the way her face twisted every time her foot came down. But she didn't say a word. She just gritted her teeth and pushed forward. The second mile was worse. The woods thickened, the trees pressing in close, their branches heavy with snow. The trail disappeared entirely, and Ethan had to navigate by memory and instinct, scanning for landmarks, for anything that looked familiar. Clara stumbled twice, catching herself on trees, on rocks, on anything she could grab. The second time she went down hard, landing on her knees in the snow. Ethan turned back, but she waved him off. I'm fine, she said, her voice hoarse. You're bleeding. She looked down. A dark stain was spreading across the side of her coat. She pressed her hand against it, her face going pale. It's not bad, she said. Clara, it's not bad. We keep going. Ethan crouched down beside her. If we keep going, you're going to bleed out before we even get there. Then we better hurry. He wanted to argue. He wanted to pick her up, carry her back to the cabin, and lock her inside where she couldn't do any more damage to herself. But he knew she wouldn't let him. So instead, he pulled off his scarf, wadded it up, and pressed it against her side. Hold this, he said. She did, her hand shaking. Ethan stood, pulled her to her feet, and looped her arm over his shoulder. Lean on me, he said. I don't need... Lean on me. She did. And together, they kept walking. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was starting to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the snow. Clara pointed with her free hand. There, she said. The dead oak. Ethan saw it. A massive tree, its trunk split down the middle, its branches skeletal and bare. And around it, just like Clara had said, the ground was disturbed. The snow had been cleared away in patches, and beneath it the dirt was dark and loose. Ethan set Clara down against a tree and pulled the shovel from his pack. He didn't have much time. The light was fading fast, and if they were still out here when night fell, they'd freeze to death. He started digging. The ground was hard, frozen solid in places, and every swing of the shovel sent a shock up his arms. But he kept at it, carving into the earth, throwing dirt over his shoulder. Clara watched from the tree, her breathing shallow, her hand still pressed against her side. How deep? Ethan asked. I don't know. I didn't see them finish. He kept digging. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3. The hole grew wider, deeper, and still there was nothing, just dirt and rocks and roots. Ethan's arms burned, his shoulders screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. Then the shovel hit something solid. Ethan froze. He dropped to his knees, brushing the dirt away with his hands. There, a piece of canvas, wrapped tight around something heavy. He pulled it free, hauling it up out of the hole, and set it on the ground. Clara limped over, her eyes wide. What is it? Ethan untied the canvas, peeling it back layer by layer, and there, gleaming in the fading light, was gold, bars of it. 10, maybe 12, each one stamped with a mark Ethan didn't recognize. He picked one up, felt the weight of it in his hands. It was real. All of it. Where did this come from? Clara whispered. I don't know, but it's worth a fortune. Clara knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for one of the bars. Then she stopped. Her fingers brushed against something else, a small leather book tucked between the bars. She pulled it out, opened it, and started reading. Her face went white. What? Ethan asked. She didn't answer. She just turned the book toward him, and he saw it. Pages and pages of handwriting. Names, dates, transactions, and at the very end, a confession. It was signed by a man named Jacob Mercer, a merchant, and according to the journal, he'd stolen the gold from a government shipment 3 months ago. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the last entry. I killed him. I killed Thomas Hartley to keep him quiet. Buried him in the woods with the gold. Clara Whitlock saw me digging. She knows. I can't let her talk. Clara's hands were shaking so hard she dropped the book. That's why they're after me. Not because I stole anything, because I'm a witness. Ethan stared at the journal, his mind racing. Thomas Hartley. He'd heard that name before. A drifter, found dead in the woods a month ago. The sheriff had ruled it a hunting accident. They're going to kill us, Clara said, her voice hollow. They're going to kill us, and no one's going to care. Ethan picked up the journal, shoved it into his coat, and started piling the gold back into the hole. Not if we get to town first. What? We take this journal to the marshal. The federal marshal, not the sheriff. We show him the evidence, and we let him handle it. And you think he'll believe us? We're nobody, Ethan. Mercer owns this town. He'll make us disappear before we even get to the marshal's office. Maybe, but it's the only shot we've got. Clara stared at him, her face a mask of fear and exhaustion. Then slowly she nodded. All right, let's do it. Ethan covered the hole, scattering snow over the dirt to hide their tracks. Then he helped Clara to her feet, and together they started back toward the cabin. They didn't make it far. The gunshot came out of nowhere, cracking through the trees like thunder. Ethan grabbed Clara and pulled her down behind a fallen log. Another shot, then another. Splinters exploded from the wood inches from Ethan's head. Stay down, he shouted. He pulled the rifle from his shoulder, scanning the trees. There. Movement, about 50 yards out. 2 men, maybe 3, spread out in a loose line. They were closing in fast. Ethan fired. The shot echoed through the woods, and one of the men dropped. The others scattered, taking cover behind trees. Ethan ducked back down, his heart pounding. How many? Clara asked. At least 2, maybe more. Can you hit them? Not if they stay behind cover. Another shot rang out, and this time it hit the log, punching clean through. Clara flinched, her hand going to her side. The bandage was soaked through now, the blood dripping into the snow. We can't stay here, Ethan said. We need to move. Where? Anywhere but here. He grabbed her hand and pulled her up. They ran, or tried to. Clara stumbled, her legs barely holding her, and Ethan half carried her through the trees. Behind them, the men were shouting, their voices growing closer. Ethan didn't look back. He just kept running. They broke through the tree line and into a small ravine, the side steep and slick with ice. Ethan slid down first, then caught Clara as she came down after him. They landed in a heap at the bottom, gasping for air. You hit? Ethan asked. No, you? Not yet. Above them, the men appeared at the edge of the ravine. One of them raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Ethan shot first. The man jerked back, clutching his shoulder, and disappeared from view. Go! Ethan shouted. They scrambled up the other side of the ravine, their hands clawing at the frozen ground. Clara's fingers slipped, and she started to fall, but Ethan grabbed her wrist and hauled her up. They reached the top and kept running. The cabin was a quarter-mile ahead. Ethan could see the smoke from the chimney, a thin line against the darkening sky. They were so close, just a little farther. Then Clara collapsed. Ethan skidded to a stop, turned back, and saw her lying in the snow. Her face was gray, her breathing shallow. The wound had torn open completely, and blood was pooling around her. No, Ethan said. No, no, no. Stay with me, Clara, stay with me. He scooped her up, ignoring the burning in his arms, and started running again. The men were right behind him now, their footsteps crunching in the snow. Ethan didn't care. He just ran. He kicked the cabin door open, carried Clara inside, and slammed it shut behind him. He dropped her onto the floor, grabbed the rifle, and shoved the barrel through the gap in the door. "Come on!" he shouted into the night. "Come on, you bastards!" The men appeared at the edge of the clearing, 5 of them now, their faces hard and cold. One of them stepped forward, the same man from before, the one who'd called himself the Law. "Last chance, Hale," he called out. "Give us the girl in the journal, and we'll let you live." Ethan aimed the rifle. "Go to hell." The man smiled. Then he raised his hand, and the others raised their guns, and the world exploded into gunfire. Ethan fired back, the rifle kicking against his shoulder. One of the men went down, then another, but there were too many of them, and they were spreading out, surrounding the cabin. A bullet punched through the door, missing Ethan's head by inches. He ducked, reloaded, fired again. Behind him, Clara was trying to sit up, her face twisted in pain. "Ethan, stay down! There's too many. I said stay down!" Another volley of shots. The windows shattered, glass raining down onto the floor. Ethan fired through the broken frame, hitting one of the men in the leg. The man screamed, fell, and didn't get up. 2 left. Ethan reloaded, his hands shaking. He was out of bullets after this. 1 more shot, and then it was just the revolver. 6 rounds against 2 men. Not great odds, but he'd take them. He aimed through the window, waiting for one of them to show themselves. The clearing was quiet now, the only sound the wind howling through the trees. Where were they? Then he saw it, movement at the edge of the cabin. One of the men was trying to circle around, get to the back door. Ethan turned, raised the rifle, and fired. The man dropped. 1 left. Ethan turned back to the front, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Come on! Where are you?" The shot came from above. Ethan looked up just in time to see the last man on the roof, his rifle aimed down through the broken chimney. Ethan dove to the side as the shot rang out, the bullet slamming into the floor where he'd been standing. The man jumped down from the roof, landed in the snow, and kicked the door open. He stepped inside, his rifle raised, his eyes locked on Ethan. "Drop it," the man said. Ethan didn't move. "I said drop it." Ethan's hand tightened on the rifle. The man took a step closer, his finger on the trigger, and then Clara shot him. The revolver cracked once, the sound deafening in the small cabin. The man stumbled, looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, and fell. Clara dropped the gun, her hand shaking, her face pale. He's dead." Ethan walked over to the body, checked for a pulse, and found nothing. He stood, his legs unsteady, and looked at Clara. She was still sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, blood soaking through her clothes. "You saved my life," he said. "We're even now." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Then he crossed the room, knelt beside her, and started working on the wound. It was bad, worse than before. The stitches had torn, the bleeding heavy. He needed to stop it, now. "This is going to hurt," he said. "Everything hurts." He worked fast, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. He cleaned the wound, restitched it with thread from his kit, and wrapped it tight. Clara gritted her teeth through the whole thing, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands clenched into fists. When he was done, he sat back, exhausted. "You're tougher than you look," he said. "You're not so bad yourself." They sat there in silence, the fire crackling in the stove, the bodies of the men lying outside in the snow. Ethan knew they didn't have much time. More would come. They always did. "We need to leave," he said. "Tonight." Clara nodded. "I know. Can you ride?" "I'll have to." Ethan stood, walked to the corner, and pulled out a saddle and bridle. He'd kept a horse in the small shed behind the cabin, an old mare, stubborn and slow, but she'd do. He went outside, saddled her up, and brought her around to the front. Clara was already on her feet, leaning against the doorframe. Ethan helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. He wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her steady, and took the reins with the other. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "Town. We find the marshal, give him the journal, and let him clean up this mess. And if Mercer gets to us first, then we fight." Clara leaned back against him, her body shaking with cold and pain. "I'm tired of fighting." "I know, but we're not done yet." He kicked the horse into motion, and they rode into the night, leaving the cabin and the bodies behind. The snow fell softly around them, covering their tracks, erasing the evidence. But Ethan knew it wouldn't matter. The truth was out now, and there was no putting it back. The ride to town took 4 hours, and every minute of it was agony. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. Her body slumped against Ethan's chest, her breathing shallow and irregular. Ethan kept one arm locked around her waist, holding her upright, while the other guided the horse through the darkness. The cold bit through his coat, his fingers going numb on the reins, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The moon was high by the time they reached the outskirts of Millridge, a collection of crooked buildings and muddy streets that called itself a town. Most of the windows were dark, the residents long since asleep, but a few lights still burned. The saloon, the general store, and at the far end of the main street, the marshal's office. Ethan steered the horse toward it, his eyes scanning the shadows. The town felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. He dismounted outside the marshal's office, his boots hitting the frozen ground with a crunch. He tied the horse to the post, then reached up and carefully lifted Clara down. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open. "Where are we?" she whispered. "Millridge. We're going to talk to the marshal." "What if he's—" "Then we'll deal with it." He kicked the door open without knocking. The marshal's office was small and cramped, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and tobacco. A single lantern burned on the desk, casting long shadows across the walls, and behind the desk, slouched in a chair with his boots propped up, was Marshal William Kane. He was older than Ethan expected, maybe 60, with a face like worn leather and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He didn't move when Ethan entered, just watched them with the kind of calm that came from years of dealing with desperate people showing up at his door in the middle of the night. "Help you?" Kane asked, his voice gravelly. Ethan set Clara down in the chair by the door, then walked to the desk and pulled the journal from his coat. He dropped it in front of the marshal. "Jacob Mercer killed a man named Thomas Hartley, buried him in the woods with stolen gold. This journal proves it, and he's been trying to kill us to keep it quiet." Kane didn't pick up the journal. He just looked at it, then at Ethan, then at Clara slumped in the chair. "That's a hell of a story." "It's not a story, it's the truth." "And who are you?" "Ethan Hale." "The doctor?" Ethan hesitated. "Used to be." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Heard about you. You're the one who killed that soldier in Virginia, ran off before they could court-martial you. That's not— doesn't matter what it is. Point is, you're not exactly a credible witness." He looked at Clara. "And who's she?" "Clara Whitlock. She's the one who saw Mercer digging the grave. That's why he's been hunting her." Kane finally picked up the journal, flipped through a few pages, then set it back down. "This could be a fake. You could have written this yourself." "Why the hell would I do that?" "Money. Revenge. A lot of reasons a man might want to take down someone like Mercer." Ethan's jaw tightened. 5 men tried to kill us tonight. They burned my cabin. They shot at us in the woods. You think I made that up too?" "I think people get shot at all the time out here. Doesn't prove Mercer had anything to do with it." "Then come with us. Come to the woods. We'll show you where the body's buried." "In the middle of the night? In a blizzard?" Kane leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I don't think so." Clara coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and both men turned to look at her. Blood was soaking through her coat again, dripping onto the floor. Ethan crossed the room, knelt beside her, and pressed his hand against the wound. "She needs a doctor," he said. "You're a doctor." "I'm not—" Ethan stopped, his frustration boiling over. "She needs a real doctor, someone with proper equipment, someone who knows what they're doing." Kane stood, walked around the desk, and looked down at Clara. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he sighed, pulled a ring of keys from his belt, and tossed them to Ethan. "There's a clinic 2 blocks down. Dr. Brennan. He'll patch her up." He paused. "But I'm keeping the journal. Evidence needs to stay with me." "Fine, just help her." Kane nodded. "I'll look into this. But if you're lying to me, Hale, I'll hang you myself." Ethan didn't respond. He just picked Clara up, carried her out into the cold, and started walking. The clinic was dark when they arrived, but Ethan didn't care. He kicked the door until a light appeared in the window above, and a minute later, an old man with wild gray hair and spectacles opened the door. "What in the—" "She has been shot, needs stitches, maybe surgery. I don't know. Ethan pushed past him, carrying Clara inside. Can you help her or not? Dr. Brennan looked at Clara, his eyes widening. Put her on the table. Now. Ethan laid her down on the examination table, and Brennan immediately went to work. He cut away the makeshift bandages, inspected the wound, and swore under his breath. Who stitched this? He asked. I did. You're a butcher, not a surgeon. I'm whatever I had to be to keep her alive. Brennan didn't argue. He just grabbed a bottle of antiseptic, poured it over the wound, and started cleaning it. Clara screamed, her body arcing off the table, and Ethan had to hold her down. Easy, Brennan said. Easy, girl. We're going to fix you up. He worked quickly, his hands steady despite his age. He restitched the wound, this time with proper surgical thread, and bandaged it with clean cloth. When he was done, he stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel. She'll live, he said, but she needs rest. Real rest. No running, no riding, no digging up graves in the middle of the night. How did you? I'm not deaf, Hale. Whole town's talking about what happened out at your place. Mercer's men came back, shot to pieces, and now there's rumors flying about stolen gold and murder. He looked at Ethan. You've made yourself some powerful enemies. I didn't ask for this. No, but you got it anyway. Brennan pulled a blanket over Clara, then turned to Ethan. You should get some rest, too. You look like hell. I'm fine. You're not, but I'm guessing you're too stubborn to listen. He walked to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey, and poured 2 glasses. He handed one to Ethan. Drink. It'll help. Ethan took the glass, downed it in one swallow, and set it on the table. The whiskey burned, but it cleared his head. He looked at Clara, lying still on the table, her face pale but peaceful. She's going to be all right, Brennan said. You sure? As sure as I can be. The rest is up to her. Ethan nodded, then walked to the window and looked out at the street. The town was still quiet, but he could feel the tension building. Mercer knew they were here. He had to. And it was only a matter of time before he made his move. You planning to stay here? Brennan asked. Until the marshal does something, yeah. And if he doesn't? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have one. Morning came too soon. Ethan had fallen asleep in the chair by Clara's bedside, his head tilted back against the wall, his rifle across his lap. He woke to the sound of voices outside, angry voices, getting closer. He stood, crossed to the window, and looked out. A crowd had gathered in the street, 20, maybe 30 people, all shouting, all pushing toward the clinic. And at the front of the crowd was Jacob Mercer. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He wore an expensive coat, clean boots, and a hat that probably cost more than most people in the town made in a year. But it was his eyes that made Ethan's skin crawl, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of anything resembling mercy. Mercer raised his hand and the crowd went quiet. Ethan Hale, he called out, his voice carrying across the street. I know you're in there. Come out. Let's talk. Ethan grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. The crowd shifted, murmuring, but no one moved. Mercer smiled. There you are, he said. I was beginning to think you'd run off. I'm not running. Good, because we have a problem, you and I. You see, you've been spreading some nasty rumors about me, saying I killed a man, saying I stole gold. And now you've got the whole town worked up. It's not a rumor if it's true. Mercer's smile didn't waver. You got proof? The marshal has it. The journal. Your journal. That old thing? Mercer laughed, a harsh, grating sound. That's not mine. Never seen it before in my life. Your name's in it. Your handwriting. Anyone can fake handwriting. You should know that, being a man of learning. He took a step closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell the marshal you made a mistake. You're going to apologize to me in front of this whole town. And then you're going to leave, quietly. And if I don't? Mercer's smile faded. Then I'll make sure you never leave at all. The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Ethan could see it in their faces. Some of them believed Mercer, some of them didn't, but none of them were willing to stand up to him. He owned them, all of them. I'm not apologizing for telling the truth, Ethan said. Then you're a fool. Mercer raised his hand again. and this time 3 men stepped out of the crowd. They were armed, their hands resting on their pistols, their eyes locked on Ethan. "Last chance, Hale," Mercer said. Ethan raised the rifle. The crowd scattered, people diving for cover, screaming. The 3 men drew their guns, but Ethan fired first. One of them went down, clutching his leg. The other 2 took cover behind a wagon, returning fire. Bullets slammed into the clinic's walls, shattering windows, tearing through wood. Inside, Clara screamed. Ethan ducked back into the clinic, slammed the door, and barricaded it with a table. Brennan was crouched behind the examination table, his face pale. "Are you insane?" he shouted. "Probably." Another volley of shots. The door splintered, the lock giving way. Ethan fired through the gap, hitting one of the men in the shoulder. The man fell, and the other one retreated. "How many bullets you got left?" Brennan asked. "Not enough." Clara pushed herself up on the table, her face twisted in pain. "Ethan, stay down. There's too many of them." "I know!" The door exploded inward, kicked open by one of Mercer's men. Ethan fired, but the rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, grabbed the revolver from his belt, and shot the man in the chest. The man fell, and Ethan slammed the door shut again. 5 rounds left. Outside, Mercer was shouting orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ethan could hear footsteps on the roof, more men moving into position. They were going to surround the clinic, burn it down, and kill everyone inside. "We need to get out of here," Brennan said. "Where?" "The whole town's against us." "Not the whole town." Brennan pointed to the back of the clinic, where a small door led to an alley. "There's a stable 2 blocks down. My horse is there. Take it. Get her out of here." "What about you?" "I'll be fine. I'm just a doctor. They won't hurt me." Ethan wanted to argue, but there was no time. He grabbed Clara, pulled her off the table, and carried her to the back door. Brennan unlocked it, pushed it open, and looked out. "Clear," he said. "Go, now." Ethan didn't wait. He ran into the alley. Clara clutched against his chest and headed for the stable. Behind him, he could hear the clinic being torn apart. The sound of wood breaking, glass shattering, men shouting. They reached the stable and Ethan kicked the door open. Brennan's horse was there, already saddled like the old man had been planning for this. Ethan put Clara on the horse, climbed up behind her, and kicked the animal into motion. They burst out of the stable and into the street, and for a moment everything went silent. The crowd turned to look, their faces frozen in shock. Then Mercer pointed, and the shooting started again. Ethan leaned low over the horse, shielding Clara with his body as bullets flew past them. The horse screamed, stumbled, but kept running. They tore through the street, past the saloon, past the general store, past the marshal's office where Kane stood in the doorway, watching them go. And then they were out of town, riding hard into the open country, the sound of gunfire fading behind them. Clara coughed, her body shaking. "Where are we going?" "I don't know." "We can't keep running." "I know." "Then what do we do?" Ethan didn't answer, because he didn't have one. All he knew was that Mercer wasn't going to stop. Not until they were dead. Not until the truth was buried along with them. They rode for another hour before the horse finally gave out. It collapsed in the middle of a field, its legs buckling, its breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Ethan climbed off, helped Clara down, and checked the animal. It had been shot. A bullet lodged in its hindquarters. It was bleeding out. Ethan pulled the revolver from his belt, aimed it at the horse's head, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the field, and the horse went still. 4 rounds left. Clara was sitting in the snow, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. What now? Ethan looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere. No shelter, no food, no water. The sun was starting to rise, but the temperature was still below freezing. If they didn't find somewhere to hole up soon, they'd freeze to death. Then he saw it, smoke, rising from behind a ridge about a mile to the east. "There," he said, pointing. "Someone's got a fire going." "What if it's more of Mercer's men?" "Then we'll deal with it." He helped Clara to her feet, and they started walking. The smoke led them to a small farmhouse, half collapsed and abandoned. But inside a fire was burning in the hearth, and sitting beside it was a man. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had been through hell. He had a rifle across his lap, and when he saw Ethan and Clara, he raised it. "Stop right there," the man said. Ethan raised his hands. We're not looking for trouble. Everyone says that. We're running from Jacob Mercer. He tried to kill us. The man's expression changed. The rifle lowered just a little. Mercer? You know him? Everyone knows him? The man stood, his eyes hard. He killed my brother, Thomas Hartley. Ethan's breath caught. You're Daniel Hartley. And if you're running from Mercer, then we've got something in common. Clara stepped forward, wincing. We found your brother, in the woods. Mercer buried him with the gold. Daniel's face went white. You found him? We found the journal too, the confession. We took it to the marshal, but Kane's in Mercer's pocket. Everyone is. Daniel's hands tightened on the rifle. Where's the journal now? The marshal has it. Or Mercer does. I don't know anymore. Daniel looked at them for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he set the rifle down and gestured to the fire. Sit. You look like you're about to fall over. They sat, the warmth of the fire seeping into their bones. Daniel poured them water from a canteen, and they drank greedily. How long have you been out here? Ethan asked. 3 weeks. Ever since I heard about Thomas. I've been trying to figure out who killed him, but no one in town would talk. They were all too scared. He looked at Clara. You saw Mercer bury him? I saw him digging. I didn't know what it was at the time. But you do now. Yes. Daniel nodded slowly. Then we finish this. Tonight. We go back to the woods, dig up my brother, and bring his body to the marshal. Let Mercer try to explain that. He'll kill us before we get that far, Ethan said. Maybe, but I'd rather die trying than live knowing that bastard got away with it. Ethan looked at Clara. She was shaking, her face pale, her breathing labored. She wasn't going to survive another fight. She needed rest, medical care, time to heal. But if they didn't end this now, Mercer would hunt them down. He'd never stop. Clara met his eyes. Do it. Clara, do it. I'm not dying for nothing. If we're going down, we're taking him with us. Ethan closed his eyes, took a breath, then opened them again. All right, we do it tonight. Daniel smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. Good, because I've been waiting a long time for this. They waited until nightfall, letting Clara rest by the fire while Daniel gathered supplies. He had 2 shovels, a lantern, rope, and enough ammunition to start a small war. Ethan watched him work, methodical and precise, like a man who'd been planning this for a long time. You've thought about this, Ethan said. Daniel didn't look up. Every day since they told me Thomas was dead, every night when I close my eyes and see his face. He paused, his hand stilling on the rifle he was cleaning. He was 19, came out here looking for work, trying to save enough to buy a piece of land. He wrote me letters every week. Then one week the letters stopped. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless. But making Mercer pay? That's something. Clara stirred by the fire, her eyes opening. How far is it to the grave? 5 miles, maybe 6, Daniel said. Through rough country. You sure you can make it? I don't have a choice. You could stay here. We'll bring him back. Clara shook her head. I saw where they buried him. You'll need me to find it in the dark. Ethan crossed the room, knelt beside her. You're barely holding together as it is. If that wound opens again, then it opens. I'm going, Ethan. You're not talking me out of it. He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the farmhouse and leave her behind, but he knew that look in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror every day for the past 3 years. Stubborn, angry, broken. The look of someone who'd lost too much to care about losing more. Fine, he said. But you stay between Daniel and me, and if shooting starts, you get down and you stay down. Yes, sir, she said, and there was the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. They left an hour later, moving through the darkness like ghosts. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the only light came from Daniel's lantern, swinging low at his side. The snow had started falling again, soft and silent, covering their tracks as they walked. Ethan kept one hand on Clara's arm, steadying her when she stumbled, holding her up when her legs threatened to give out. She didn't complain. She just gritted her teeth and kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Daniel led the way, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the trees. He moved like a hunter, quiet and cautious, stopping every few minutes to listen. Ethan wondered how many nights he'd spent out here, searching for answers, searching for justice, how many times he'd imagined this moment. The wind picked up as they moved deeper into the woods, carrying with it the smell of pine and frozen earth. Ethan's fingers were going numb despite his gloves, and he could see Clara's breath coming in shorter gasps, each one visible in the cold air. "Tell me about him," Ethan said to Daniel, partly to keep the man talking, partly to keep Clara focused on something other than the pain. "About Thomas." Daniel was quiet for so long that Ethan thought he wasn't going to answer. Then softly, "He was stubborn. Pig-headed, really. Our father died when Thomas was 12, and he thought that made him the man of the house. Tried to take care of our mother, tried to take care of me, even though I'm 5 years older." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "He was always trying to prove something, to himself mostly." "Sounds familiar," Clara said quietly. "Yeah, I guess it does." Daniel stopped, held up his hand. They all froze, listening, but there was nothing except the wind and the soft whisper of falling snow. He started walking again. "When he said he was heading west, I told him he was crazy. Told him to stay home, find work in town, but he wouldn't listen. Said he wanted to make something of himself, come back with enough money to buy land, build a house." His voice cracked. "He was going to get married. Girl named Sarah from the next town over. He had it all planned out." "She know what happened?" Ethan asked. "Yeah. I wrote to her after we found out. She didn't write back." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Can't say I blame her. What's she supposed to say? Sorry your brother got murdered by some rich bastard who wanted to cover his tracks?" They walked in silence after that, the weight of Thomas's stolen future hanging over them like the clouds overhead. They reached the woods an hour before midnight. The trees closed in around them, blocking out what little light the sky provided, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ethan's breath came out in white clouds, and he could feel the cold seeping through his coat into his bones. "How much farther?" Daniel asked. Clara pointed to the left, her hand shaking. "That way. Maybe another half-mile." They pushed deeper into the woods, the snow crunching beneath their feet. Ethan's hand drifted to the revolver at his belt. 4 rounds. He'd have to make them count. The forest seemed to press in on them from all sides. The darkness so complete that even with the lantern they could barely see 10 feet ahead. Every shadow looked like a person, every branch cracking under snow like a footstep. "Wait," Clara said suddenly. "I recognize that tree, the one with the split trunk. We're close." Daniel raised the lantern higher, and the light caught on something up ahead, a break in the trees, a clearing, and in the center of it, the dead oak. Then Clara stopped. "There," she whispered, pointing ahead. Ethan followed her gaze and saw it. The dead oak, its twisted branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. And beneath it, just like Clara had said, the disturbed ground, now covered with a fresh layer of snow. Daniel walked forward slowly, his face pale in the lantern light. He set the lantern down, picked up one of the shovels, and started digging. Ethan grabbed the other shovel and joined him. They worked in silence, the only sound the scrape of metal against frozen earth. It didn't take long. The ground had been disturbed recently, and beneath the snow the dirt was still loose. Within 20 minutes, Daniel's shovel hit something solid. He stopped, his breath coming in short gasps. "That's him." Ethan knelt down, brushed the dirt away with his hands. There, wrapped in canvas, was a body. The smell hit him immediately. Decay, rot, death. He'd smelled it before, in the field hospital, in the aftermath of battle. But this was different. This was personal. Daniel dropped to his knees, his hands shaking. He pulled the canvas back, and even in the dim light, Ethan could see the bullet hole in the skull. Small, precise, execution style. A shot to the back of the head. "Thomas," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. Clara turned away, her hand over her mouth. Ethan stood, giving Daniel space, giving him time. The man sat there in the snow, his brother's body in front of him, his face twisted with grief and rage. "He shot him in the back of the head," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "Didn't even give him a chance, just killed him like he was nothing." "I'm sorry," Ethan said again, and this time he meant it. The words felt inadequate, useless, but they were all he had. Daniel looked up at him, tears streaming down his face. I should have been here. I should have come with him. If I'd been here, maybe. You can't think like that, Ethan said quietly. You'll drive yourself crazy with the maybes. How do you know? Because I've been doing it for 3 years. Daniel stared at him for a long moment, then looked back at his brother's body. Help me get him out. We're taking him home. Together, they lifted the body from the grave, wrapped it tighter in the canvas, and tied it with rope. It was heavy, awkward, and the whole time Ethan could feel the weight of what they were doing. This wasn't just evidence. This was a person. Someone's brother, someone's son, someone's future husband. Clara stood at the edge of the clearing, watching, her arms wrapped around herself. Ethan could see her shivering, whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. You all right? He asked. No, but I will be. She looked at the grave, at the disturbed earth. We should check if there's anything else down there. Documents, evidence, anything. Daniel nodded and grabbed the shovel again. He dug deeper, more carefully now, clearing away the dirt around where the body had been. And there, at the bottom of the hole, was a metal box. Ethan pulled it out, wiped the dirt away. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. One solid hit with the shovel, and it broke open. Inside were gold bars, 10 of them, each one stamped with a government seal. And beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, was a journal. Daniel pulled it out, opened it to the first page. His eyes widened. This is Mercer's handwriting. I've seen it before, on contracts, on deeds. He flipped through the pages, reading aloud. Dates, names, transactions, a detailed record of the heist, who was involved, how much they paid for inside information, where they planned to hide the gold. And at the very end, the confession. Thomas Hartley discovered the cash by accident. He saw too much. I had no choice. I eliminated the threat and buried him with the evidence. Clara Whitlock was in the area. If she saw me, she's the only witness. I'll handle her next. The words hung in the cold air, damning and final. Mercer had written his own death sentence. We have him, Daniel said, his voice shaking with something between grief and triumph. We finally have him. They were about to lift the body onto Daniel's shoulders when the voice cut through the darkness. Well, well, look what we have here. Ethan spun around, his hand going to his revolver. Jacob Mercer stepped out of the trees, flanked by 6 men, all armed. The lantern light caught his face, casting deep shadows across his features. He looked calm, almost amused. I had a feeling you'd come back, Mercer said, his voice conversational. Predictable, really. The brother wants closure. The doctor wants redemption. The girl wants vindication. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Too bad none of you are going to get it. Daniel stood, his hand moving toward his rifle. 2 of Mercer's men raised their guns immediately. I wouldn't, Mercer said. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Best thing you can do now is walk away. Leave the body, leave the gold, leave the journal. Walk away and I'll let you live. Walk away! Daniel's voice was shaking with fury. You killed my brother! Your brother was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He saw something he shouldn't have seen. I did what I had to do. You murdered him. I protected my investment. Mercer's voice hardened. That gold belonged to me. I planned that heist for months. Paid good money for inside information, bribed the right people, took all the risks, and your idiot brother stumbled onto it by accident. So yes, I killed him. And I'd do it again. The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. Ethan's hand tightened on the revolver. He could feel Clara behind him, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Daniel took a step forward, his fists clenched. You're going to hang for this. Mercer laughed, the sound harsh and grating. No, I'm not. Because no one's going to believe you. I own the sheriff, the judge, half the merchants in town. You think anyone's going to take your word over mine? He gestured to the body. Even with that, I'll just say you killed him yourself. Crazy grieving brother, driven mad by loss. The story writes itself. The journal is going to disappear, along with the 3 of you. Mercer pulled out a pistol, aimed it at Daniel. Last chance. Walk away now, or die here with your brother. We're not going anywhere, Clara said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady despite her shaking hands. You can threaten us all you want, but we're not running. Mercer turned to look at her, his eyes cold. The vagrant speaks. Tell me, girl, who's going to believe you? You're nothing. A drifter, a thief, Someone people cross the street to avoid. Your testimony is worthless. Maybe, but it's still the truth. Truth is whatever I say it is. Mercer cocked the pistol. And I say you three are about to have a very unfortunate accident. Ethan raised his revolver, knowing it was pointless. 6 against 3, and Clara could barely stand. They were dead. All of them. Then a voice rang out from the darkness. Drop your weapons, now! Everyone froze. Marshal Kane stepped out of the trees, flanked by 5 deputies, all with rifles aimed at Mercer and his men. Behind them were another dozen townspeople, all armed, all watching. Mercer's face went white. William, what are you doing here? My job, Kane said. His voice was cold, all the lazy drawl gone. Something I should have done 2 years ago. Drop your weapons, all of you, now. Mercer's men hesitated, looking to their boss. Mercer's face had gone from white to red. His jaw clenched so tight Ethan could see the muscles jumping. You can't be serious, Mercer said. After everything I've done for you. You mean after everything you've paid me to ignore? Kane took a step closer, his rifle never wavering. I've been looking the other way for 2 years, Mercer, telling myself it was just business, just politics, that you weren't really hurting anyone who didn't deserve it. But murder? He shook his head. That's where I draw the line. I'll ruin you. I'll destroy your career, your reputation. You already did. The moment I took your first bribe. Kane's voice was steady, resolved. Now drop the guns or I'll shoot you myself. For a moment, Mercer looked like he might fight. His finger tightened on the trigger, his eyes locked on Kane. Then slowly, he lowered the pistol. His men followed suit, dropping their weapons into the snow. The deputies moved forward, collecting the guns, binding hands with rope. Mercer stood there, his face a mask of rage, as they tied his wrists behind his back. This isn't over, Mercer hissed at Kane. You'll regret this. All of you will. Maybe, Kane said, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. He walked over to the grave, looked down at Thomas Hartley's body, then at Daniel. The younger man was standing there, tears streaming down his face, his whole body shaking. I'm sorry, son, Kane said quietly. I should have done this a long time ago. Should have listened when you came asking questions. Should have investigated when the reports didn't add up. He paused. I failed you. I failed your brother. And I'm going to have to live with that. Daniel didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at his brother's body, his grief too deep for words. Kane turned to his deputies. Take them in, all of them. Lock them up until the circuit judge arrives. He looked at Ethan, Clara, and Daniel. You three, come with me. We need to get your statements on record. Everything. Every detail. They walked back through the woods, the deputies leading Mercer and his men ahead of them. The townspeople who'd come with Kane fell in behind, forming a protective escort. Ethan kept his arm around Clara, supporting her weight as she limped through the snow. How did you know we'd be here? Ethan asked Kane. Dr. Brennan. He came to see me this afternoon, told me what you were planning. Told me that if I had any decency left, I'd get off my ass and do something about Mercer. Kane let out a long breath. He was right. I've been a coward. But I'm done with that now. Why'd you change your mind, really? Kane was quiet for a moment. Because I'm tired. Tired of being owned. Tired of looking the other way. Tired of seeing good people suffer while men like Mercer get richer. He looked back at the body being carried by 2 of the deputies. And because that boy didn't deserve to die in an unmarked grave while his killer walked free. They reached Millridge as the sun was starting to rise. The town was already awake, people gathering in the streets, whispering, pointing. News traveled fast out here, and everyone knew something big had happened. Kane led them straight to the jail, where Mercer and his men were locked in cells. Mercer stood at the bars, his face dark with fury, but he didn't say a word. He just watched as they passed, his eyes promising violence. Kane took Ethan, Clara, and Daniel into his office, closed the door, and poured them each a cup of coffee. It was terrible, bitter and cold, but Ethan drank it anyway. The warmth helped, even if the taste didn't. Tell me everything, Kane said, pulling out a notebook. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out. So they did. Clara told him about seeing Mercer in the woods, about the accident, about the men hunting her. Ethan told him about the journal, about the gold, about the fight at the clinic, and the shootout at his cabin. And Daniel told him about Thomas, about the letters that stopped coming, about the weeks he'd spent searching for answers that no one would give him. Kane listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, made them go over certain details multiple times. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face. "This is going to get messy," he said. "Mercer's got a lot of friends in this town, people who owe him money, people who owe him favors. They're not going to take this lying down." "What about the law?" Daniel asked. "He confessed. We have witnesses, evidence, a body. That has to count for something." "It does. But the law moves slow out here. The circuit judge won't arrive for another 3 days. Until then, we have to keep Mercer locked up and hope his friends don't try anything stupid." Kane looked at each of them in turn. "You three need to stay somewhere safe, somewhere public, where people can see you. The clinic, maybe. Dr. Brennan's place." "I'm not hiding," Daniel said. "I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to see justice done." They ended up back at the clinic. Brennan took one look at Clara and shook his head in that exasperated way of his. "You're determined to kill yourself, aren't you?" "Not if I can help it," Clara said. He got her settled on the examination table, changed her bandages for what felt like the 100th time, and gave her something for the pain. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Ethan sat in the chair by the window, watching the street. He was exhausted, his body aching, his mind numb. But he couldn't sleep, not yet, not until this was over. Daniel paced the room, unable to sit still. His grief had transformed into nervous energy, a need to move, to do something, anything. "You should rest," Ethan said. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, see Thomas." Daniel stopped at the window, staring out. "Mercer's right about one thing. This town is owned, by money, by power, by men like him. What makes us think anything's going to change?" "Because it has to," Ethan said simply. "Because if it doesn't, then Thomas died for nothing." "He died for nothing anyway." "No. He died because he saw something wrong and didn't look away. That's not nothing. That's everything." Daniel turned to look at him, his eyes red and tired. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" Brennan came over carrying a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. He poured, handed them out, and raised his glass. "To the ones we've lost," he said, "and to the ones we're fighting for." They drank in silence. The next 3 days were the longest of Ethan's life. The town seemed to hold its breath, suspended between relief and unease. Mercer's supporters, and there were more than Ethan had expected, muttered in corners, shot dark looks at anyone who'd testified or helped with the arrest. Others, the ones who'd been too afraid to speak up before, suddenly found their voices. They told stories of intimidation, of debts forgiven in exchange for silence, of justice delayed and denied. On the second day, someone threw a rock through the clinic window. The note tied to it read, "Leave town or you're next." Kane posted deputies outside after that, 2 men at all times. But Ethan knew it wasn't enough. If Mercer's people wanted to get to them, they would. Clara recovered slowly, though the stress wasn't helping. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, her hand pressed to her side. Ethan would sit with her until she fell back asleep, sometimes reading aloud from one of Brennan's medical texts, sometimes just holding her hand. "I'm scared," she admitted one night. "Me too." What if they let him go? What if the judge is another one of his people? Then we'll deal with it. How? Ethan didn't have an answer. He just squeezed her hand tighter. On the third day, the circuit judge arrived. His name was Augustus Crane, and he was a thin, severe-looking man in his 60s with white hair and steel-rimmed spectacles. He took one look at the crowded town, at the tension in the air, and ordered the trial to begin immediately. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Ethan sat beside Clara in the front row, his hand resting on her arm. She was shaking, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the table where Mercer sat with his lawyers. Mercer had cleaned up for the trial. His prison grays had been replaced with an expensive suit, his hair combed, his face calm and composed. He looked like a respected businessman, not a murderer. And that was exactly what his lawyers were counting on. The judge called the court to order and the room fell silent. The prosecution went first, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The body. found buried in the woods. The journal, written in Mercer's own hand, detailing the heist and the murder. The testimony of Clara, who'd seen him digging the grave. The testimony of Ethan, who'd treated Clara and witnessed the attempts on her life. The testimony of Daniel, whose brother had been killed. It was damning. Piece by piece, the prosecution built a case that seemed impossible to refute. Then it was the defense's turn. Mercer's lawyer was a man named Thornton Webb, slick and well-dressed, with a voice like honey and eyes like ice. He stood, adjusted his cuffs, and smiled at the jury. "Gentlemen of the jury," he began, "what we have here is not evidence of murder. What we have is a tragedy compounded by lies, desperation, and a rush to judgment." He paced in front of the jury box, hands clasped behind his back. Thomas Hartley was, by all accounts, a good young man. His death is a loss. But my client did not kill him. The prosecution would have you believe that Mr. Mercer, a respected businessman, a pillar of this community, would risk everything, his reputation, his fortune, his very life, to murder a stranger over stolen gold. He paused. "Does that make any sense to you?" He picked up the journal, held it up. "This journal. The prosecution claims it's written in my client's hand, but handwriting can be forged. We've all seen it. And conveniently, this journal appears only after my client's enemies have reason to want him destroyed." Webb set the journal down and turned to face Clara. "And then there's Miss Whitlock, a vagrant, a woman with no fixed address, no steady employment, no ties to this community. A woman who, by her own admission, has been accused of theft multiple times." "Objection," the prosecutor said, standing. "Those accusations were never proven." "But they exist," Webb countered. "They speak to character, to credibility." He looked at the jury. "Ask yourselves, is this a woman you would trust? Is this someone whose word you would take over that of a respected member of this community?" Ethan felt Clara stiffen beside him. Her breathing was getting faster, her hands clenched into fists. This was exactly what Kane had warned them about. They were going to tear her apart. Webb wasn't done. "And Dr. Hale, a man who fled his post during the war after killing a patient, a man who's been living in isolation, avoiding responsibility, avoiding consequences. A man with every reason to fabricate a story to redeem himself. That's not..." Ethan started to stand, but Kane, sitting behind them, put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't," he whispered. "Let them finish. You'll get your turn." Webb smiled, as if he'd expected the reaction. "The truth, gentlemen, is much simpler than the prosecution would have you believe. Thomas Hartley was killed, yes, but not by my client. Most likely by bandits, or perhaps by Daniel Hartley himself in some dispute we can only speculate about. The gold? Planted. The journal? Forged. And these witnesses? Desperate people looking for someone to blame, someone to make pay for their own failures." He walked back to the defense table, placed his hand on Mercer's shoulder. "Jacob Mercer is not a perfect man. He's made enemies in business. He's been tough, sometimes ruthless, but he is not a murderer. And I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, to see through this web of lies and desperation, to see the truth, and to acquit him." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Then it was time for witness testimony. Clara was called first. She walked slowly to the stand, her hand pressed against her side, and took her seat. The prosecutor led her through her story, seeing Mercer in the woods, the wagon accident, the men hunting her. She spoke clearly, never wavering, even when her voice shook. Then Webb stood for cross-examination. "Miss Whitlock," he began, his tone almost gentle. "You claim you saw my client in the woods 2 weeks before your accident. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And it was dark. It was evening. There was still light. But not full daylight. Shadows, perhaps?" "I saw him clearly." "From what distance?" Clara hesitated. "Maybe 50 yards." 50 yards in fading light, through trees." Webb smiled. "And yet you're certain it was Mr. Mercer?" "I recognized him. I'd seen him before in town." "Had you spoken to him?" "No." "So you knew him only by sight, from a distance?" Webb picked up a piece of paper. "I have here a list of accusations made against you in the past 3 years. Theft in Silverton, vagrancy in Cedar Falls, fraud in..." "I was never convicted of anything," Clara said, her voice sharp. "But you were accused, repeatedly. That speaks to a pattern, doesn't it? A pattern of dishonesty? No, it speaks to a pattern of being poor and female. To a pattern of people blaming me for things I didn't do because I was easy to blame. Some people in the courtroom murmured approval. Webb's expression hardened. You expect this jury to believe that you, a woman with no credibility, no standing in this community, saw my client commit a crime, yet said nothing for 2 weeks? I was afraid. I knew no one would believe me. Or perhaps because it never happened. Perhaps you saw someone else, or no one at all, and when you needed a story to explain your own criminal activity. I'm not a criminal, Clara said, her voice rising. And I'm not lying. I saw Jacob Mercer dig a grave and bury a man. I saw it with my own eyes. And no matter how many times you try to make me sound like a liar, like a thief, like someone who doesn't matter, I know what I saw. The courtroom fell silent. Clara stared at Webb, her eyes blazing, and for a moment the lawyer looked uncertain. Then he recovered. No further questions. Clara stepped down, her legs shaking. Ethan stood as she returned to her seat, helped her sit down. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. You did good, he whispered. I don't know if it was enough. Ethan was called next. He testified about finding Clara, about the journal, about the attacks. Webb tried the same tactics, questioning his credibility, his motives, his history. But Ethan had been prepared. He answered calmly, never rising to the bait, sticking to the facts. Then Daniel took the stand. He testified about Thomas, about the letters that stopped, about finding his brother's body. His voice was steady, but his grief was obvious, and several people in the courtroom were crying by the time he finished. Webb approached carefully. Even he seemed to know that attacking a grieving brother could backfire. Mr. Hartley, he began, I'm sorry for your loss, truly. But I must ask, isn't it possible that your grief has clouded your judgment? That you're looking for someone to blame and my client is simply convenient? Daniel looked at him for a long moment. No, it's not possible. Because I saw the bullet hole in my brother's skull. Because I read the journal where Mercer confessed to killing him. Because I know the truth, and no amount of fancy words from you is going to change that. Webb tried a few more questions, but Daniel wouldn't budge. Finally, he gave up and sat down. The prosecution called Marshal Kane. Kane testified about arresting Mercer, about the evidence found at the scene, about Mercer's own words when confronted. His testimony was calm, factual, and devastating. Webb tried to discredit him too. Isn't it true, Marshal, that you've accepted money from my client in the past? Yes. So you had a financial relationship with him. I took bribes. I'm not proud of it. But I'm here now telling the truth because that's my job. A job you weren't doing when you were taking his money. You're right. I wasn't. I was a coward and a crook. But I'm trying to make that right. And the first step is making sure a murderer doesn't walk free. The judge called a recess after that. The jury filed out, and everyone waited. Ethan stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, his back against the wall. Clara sat on a bench, her eyes closed. Daniel paced, unable to stand still. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, the bailiff appeared. Jury's back. They filed back into the courtroom. The jury took their seats, their faces unreadable. The foreman stood, a piece of paper in his hands. The judge asked for the verdict. The foreman cleared his throat. We find the defendant, Jacob Mercer, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom exploded, people shouting, crying, arguing. Mercer lunged forward, his face twisted with rage, screaming obscenities. The deputies grabbed him, held him back. The judge banged his gavel over and over, calling for order. It took 5 minutes for the room to quiet down. The judge looked at Mercer, his expression stern. Jacob Mercer, you have been found guilty of the murder of Thomas Hartley by a jury of your peers. This court sentences you to hang by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out 1 week from today. Mercer was still screaming as the deputies dragged him out. You're all dead, you hear me? All of you. I'll make sure of it. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Ethan turned to Clara. She was crying, her hands over her face, her shoulders shaking. He pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest. It's over, he said quietly. It's over. Daniel stood nearby, staring at nothing, his face blank. Ethan reached out, put a hand on his shoulder. The younger man looked at him, and Ethan saw something break in his eyes. "It doesn't feel like justice," Daniel said quietly. "It just feels empty." "I know," Ethan said, "but it's something. It's more than he gave Thomas." They walked out of the courtroom together, into the cold afternoon air. The crowd parted around them, some people congratulating them, others glaring. The town was divided, and Ethan knew it would stay that way for a long time. But for now, they'd won, and that would have to be enough. But the week before the hanging was the longest of Ethan's life. The town seemed to hold its breath, suspended between relief and unease. Mercer's supporters, and there were more than Ethan had expected, muttered in corners, shot dark looks at anyone who'd testified. A few made threats. Someone left a dead rat on the clinic doorstep. Another painted the word liars across the front window in red paint. But there were others too. People who came to the clinic to shake Ethan's hand, to thank Clara for her bravery, to tell Daniel they were sorry for his loss. People who'd been intimidated by Mercer for years, who'd lost businesses or homes or family members because they'd crossed him. For every person who hated them, there was another who saw them as heroes. Clara stayed at the clinic, recovering slowly. Her wound was healing, the infection finally gone, but the nights were hard. Ethan would wake to find her sitting by the window, staring out at the dark street, her arms wrapped around herself. "Can't sleep?" he asked one night, sitting down beside her. She didn't turn around. "I keep thinking about what happens after." "After what?" "After he hangs. After this is over. What do I do then? Where do I go?" She finally looked at him, her eyes tired. "I've spent so long just trying to survive, I forgot how to do anything else. I don't know who I am without someone chasing me. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. And you, what are you going to do?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He'd been asking himself the same question for days. He couldn't go back to the cabin. It had been burned to the ground by Mercer's men. He couldn't go back to being a surgeon, not in a hospital, not with the memories of what he'd done, but he also couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I'm done hiding. I know that much." Clara studied his face, and something shifted in her expression. "You know what I think? I think you never wanted to hide in the first place. You just didn't know how to forgive yourself." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Definitely." She reached out, took his hand. "You saved my life, Ethan. More than once. You could have left me in the snow. You could have walked away when Mercer's men showed up. You could have let me bleed out in that wagon, but you didn't. You chose to save me even when it put you in danger. That has to count for something. It doesn't erase what I did. Doesn't bring that soldier back." "No. But it's a start. It's proof that you're not the failure you think you are." Ethan looked down at their joined hands. Her fingers were thin, scarred from years of hard living. But they were strong. She was strong. Stronger than he'd ever been. "What if I fail again?" he asked quietly. "Then you fail. But at least you'll have tried, and that's more than most people can say." The next morning, Daniel showed up at the clinic. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "I need to talk to you," he said to Ethan. They stepped outside into the cold morning air. The sun was just rising, painting the mountains gold and pink. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Daniel said. "After the hanging, after we bury Thomas properly." "Yeah? I can't stay here. In this town. Every corner reminds me of him, of what should have been." He looked at Ethan. "But I also can't just wander, can't just drift from place to place like I've been doing. I need purpose. Something that matters." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I've watched you these past weeks. Watched you save Clara. Watched you stand up to Mercer. Watched you testify, even though it meant digging up your own past." Daniel's voice was rough. "You've found something, some way to make what you do matter, and I want that. I need that." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if there's room in whatever you do next for one more person. Someone who's good with a rifle, who knows the land, who'll watch your back when things get ugly." "Daniel, I know I've got my own demons. I know I'm angry and broken and probably not the best company. But I'm loyal. And I'm done watching good people suffer while bad people win. He met Ethan's eyes. So I'm asking, is there room? Ethan thought about it. About the idea that had been forming in his mind over the past few days. About Clara's words the night before. About the people in this territory who had no access to medical care, who died from treatable injuries because there was no one to help them. Yeah, he said finally. There's room. The day of the execution arrived gray and cold. Clouds hung low over the mountains, threatening snow. By noon, a crowd had gathered in the town square. Hundreds of people, some from Millridge, others from neighboring towns who'd heard about the trial and wanted to see justice done. The gallows had been built in the center of the square, a crude wooden structure that creaked in the wind. Ethan stood at the back of the crowd with Clara and Daniel. None of them wanted to be there, but they needed to see it through, needed to know it was really over. The deputies brought Mercer out in chains. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His expensive coat was gone, replaced by prison grays. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. But when he saw the crowd, something flickered in his expression. Defiance, rage, hatred, all mixed together. The judge stood on the platform, reading the sentence aloud. His voice carried across the square, formal and final. Mercer was given a chance to speak. Most men in his position would have begged for mercy, proclaimed their innocence, made peace with whatever higher power they believed in. But not Mercer. You think this changes anything? He shouted, his voice cracking with fury. You think killing me makes you righteous? Makes you better than me? He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. This town was built on blood and money, same as everywhere else. The only difference is I had the guts to admit it, to take what I wanted instead of waiting for someone to give it to me. The crowd murmured, uncomfortable. Some people looked down, unwilling to meet his eyes. You're all the same, Mercer continued, his voice rising. All of you, scheming and lying and stepping on whoever you have to step on to get ahead. The only reason you're standing there judging me is because I got caught. And you didn't. That's enough, the judge said. But Mercer wasn't done. He turned, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Clara. He stared at her, his lips curling into a sneer. You'll regret this, girl. All of you will. Because men like me, we're the ones who make this world turn. And when we're gone, everything falls apart. You'll see. You'll wish I was still around to keep things running. Clara didn't flinch. She met his gaze steadily, her chin up, her spine straight. And in that moment, Ethan saw something shift, the fear that had been haunting her for weeks, the doubt, the uncertainty. It was gone. In its place was steel. The executioner placed the hood over Mercer's head, then the noose around his neck. The judge gave the signal. The lever was pulled. Mercer dropped. The crack echoed across the square, sharp and final. The body swung once, twice, then went still. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They just stood there in silence, watching, as if they couldn't quite believe it was real. Ethan looked at Daniel. The younger man's face was blank, empty. No relief, no satisfaction. Just the same hollow grief he'd been carrying since they found Thomas. Is it over? Clara whispered. Yeah, Ethan said. It's over. But he wasn't sure he believed it. Daniel was the first to turn away. He walked through the crowd without looking back, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Ethan watched him go, wondering if the man would find what he was looking for, wondering if any of them would. Clara's hand slipped into his. Come on, let's get out of here. They left the square, walking slowly through the streets. The town felt different now, like something fundamental had shifted. Mercer's death had left a vacuum, and Ethan could already see people positioning themselves to fill it. The merchant who'd been Mercer's biggest rival. The banker who'd always resented Mercer's influence. The cycle would start again. Power, corruption, violence. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually. You're thinking too much, Clara said. How do you know? You get this look on your face, like you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a solution. She was right. He was. I keep thinking about what Mercer said, about the town being built on blood and money, about how we're all the same. He was trying to justify what he did, trying to drag everyone else down to his level. Maybe. But he wasn't completely wrong. Clara stopped walking, turned to face him. You know what this town needs? A doctor. A real one. Someone who will treat people whether they can pay or not. Someone who won't look the other way when bad things happen. Someone who will stand up and do what's right, even when it's hard. Ethan stared at her. You want me to stay here? After everything that's happened? I want you to stop running. And yeah, I think you should stay. Not necessarily in Millridge, but somewhere in this territory. This whole region needs doctors. Needs people who give a damn. She paused. You told me you're done hiding. Prove it. Do something that matters. And what about you? Clara smiled, a real smile this time, not the guarded one she usually wore. Well, someone's got to keep you from getting yourself killed. Might as well be me. Her smile faded slightly. Besides, I'm tired of running too. Tired of being invisible, of not mattering. Maybe it's time we both figured out who we are when we're not trying to survive. That night, Ethan sat in Dr. Brennan's clinic, staring at the medical instruments laid out on the table. Scalpels, forceps, needles, thread. Tools he hadn't touched in 3 years, except for the desperate surgeries he'd performed on Clara. The old doctor walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of Ethan and sat down with a heavy sigh. You've been staring at those tools for 2 hours, Brennan said. You planning to do something with them, or just admire them? I don't know if I can do this. If I can be a doctor again. Sure you can. You've already done it. Multiple times. You saved that girl's life. Operated on her in a blizzard with a hunting knife. If that's not being a doctor, I don't know what is. That was different. That was survival. Medicine is always survival. The only difference is whether you're trying to save someone else or yourself. Brennan took a sip of coffee, grimaced. You know why I became a doctor? No. Because I watched my daughter die of pneumonia when I was 25. I stood there next to her bed, not knowing what to do, feeling completely helpless. She was 6 years old, had her whole life ahead of her, and I couldn't save her. He set down his cup. After she died, I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. So I went to medical school, studied, practiced, became the best damn doctor I could be. Did it work? Brennan laughed, a sad sound. No. I felt helpless plenty of times since then. Lost patients I should have saved, made mistakes that cost lives. But I've also saved people, delivered babies, set broken bones, treated fevers and infections and all manner of ailments. And at the end of the day, that has to count for something. Ethan picked up one of the scalpels, felt the weight of it in his hand. His fingers didn't shake. They'd been steady for weeks now. What if I fail again? What if I kill someone? Then you fail. You might kill someone. That's the risk you take every time you pick up a knife or administer medicine. But you know what the alternative is? Brennan leaned forward. People dying who could have been saved. People suffering who could have been helped. Is that better? Is avoiding failure worth letting people die? No. Then stop overthinking it and get back to work. The next morning, Ethan found Clara in the market buying supplies. She turned when she heard his footsteps, a question in her eyes. I've made a decision, he said. I'm going to set up a practice. Not here in Millridge. Out on the frontier. There are settlements out there, mining camps, homesteads, places with no doctors, no medical care. People who need help and can't get it. Clara's eyes widened. A traveling clinic? Something like that. I'll go where I'm needed. Anyone who asks for help gets it. No questions, no payment required. That's ambitious. It's probably stupid, Ethan admitted. I'll be broke most of the time. I'll be riding through dangerous territory. I might not make a difference. Or you might save lives. Lots of them. Maybe. Clara set down her basket, crossed her arms. And you're just going to do this alone? I don't. Because that seems like a lot for one person. You'd need someone to help. Someone to handle supplies, keep records, maybe watch your back when things get rough. Someone who knows what it's like to be desperate and overlooked. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Are you offering? Depends. You offering to let me? He looked at her. This woman who'd been beaten down by the world, who'd survived things that would have broken most people, who'd stood in that courtroom and refused to be silenced. She was damaged, scarred, imperfect. She had nightmares. She still limped sometimes. She flinched at loud noises, just like him. Yeah, he said. I am. Clara smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. Then I accept. It took them 2 weeks to prepare. They bought a sturdy wagon, outfitted it with medical supplies and basic living necessities. Ethan used what little money he had saved, and Brennan donated equipment from his own practice. Some townspeople helped too, the ones who'd been grateful for the verdict, who wanted to see something good come from all the pain. Daniel threw himself into the preparations with desperate energy. He didn't talk much about Thomas, but Ethan could see the grief still eating at him. The younger man had attended a small funeral service, burying his brother properly in the town cemetery with a headstone that read, "Thomas Hartley, beloved brother, taken too soon." On the morning of the burial, Daniel had stood at the grave for over an hour, not moving, not speaking, just standing there in the cold. Now he was helping load the wagon, checking supplies, making sure everything was secured. It was clear he needed this, needed something to focus on besides his grief. On the last day before they were set to leave, Daniel pulled Ethan aside. "I'm coming with you," he said, not asking, stating. Ethan had been expecting this. "Daniel, I know what you're going to say, that I need time to grieve, that I should stay here, settle down, try to move on. But I can't." Daniel's voice was rough. "If I stay here, all I'm going to do is think about my brother, about what I lost, about how I failed him." "You didn't fail him. I should have been here, should have come with him, should have—" He stopped, took a breath. "It doesn't matter. What's done is done. But I can't stay in this town. I need to go. And I need to do something that matters. You don't owe me anything. I know, but you're going to need someone who can hunt, who knows the land, who can protect you when things go sideways. That's me. I'm good with a rifle. I know how to track, how to navigate, how to survive out there." He paused. "And maybe, if I help you save other people's brothers and sisters and children, it'll make losing Thomas hurt a little less." Ethan understood, because he'd been thinking the same thing for 3 years. Maybe you couldn't erase your failures, but maybe you could balance them out, one life saved at a time. "All right," he said. "You're in. But this isn't going to be easy. We're going to be cold, hungry, exhausted. We're going to see things that'll break your heart. And we won't be able to save everyone. I know." "And you're still willing?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I am." They left on a cold morning in early spring. The sun was just starting to melt the snow on the peaks, and the air smelled like pine and new growth. The wagon was loaded, the horses fed and watered, everything ready. Half the town came to see them off. Marshal Kane was there, looking older but lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "You did a good thing here, Hale," Kane said, shaking Ethan's hand. "Don't let anyone tell you different. I just did what needed doing. That's more than most people can say." He handed Ethan a letter, sealed with wax. "This is for the federal marshal in Carson City. Tells him what happened here, vouches for you and Clara. If you run into trouble anywhere in the territory, show them this. Should help. Thank you." Dr. Brennan was there too, his eyes wet behind his spectacles. He handed Ethan a wooden case, worn and scarred from decades of use. "My surgical kit," Brennan said. "Been with me for 40 years. Every instrument in there has saved at least one life. Figure you'll get more use out of it than I will now." Ethan opened the case, saw the gleaming instruments inside. They were old but well-maintained, loved. "I can't take this." "You can and you will. Just promise me you'll use it to do good, to help people who can't help themselves." "I promise." Brennan nodded, satisfied. Then he pulled Ethan into a rough hug. "Make me proud, boy." Clara climbed onto the wagon, settling into the seat. She'd gained weight over the past weeks, color returning to her cheeks, strength to her body. She still had scars, physical and otherwise, but she held herself differently now. Taller. Surer. Daniel swung up into the back of the wagon, checking their supplies one last time. He'd packed his brother's letters in a small wooden box, kept them wrapped in oilcloth. Ethan had seen him reading them at night sometimes, his face illuminated by candlelight, tears streaming down his cheeks. Ethan took the reins, looked out at the town one last time. This place had nearly killed them, but it had also given them something. Purpose, maybe. Or just a reason to keep going. He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. They headed east, away from Millridge, toward the open country. The first settlement was 3 days away, a mining camp called Silver Ridge. Word had reached them through a traveling merchant that there was an outbreak of dysentery there and no one to treat it. 20 people sick, 5 already dead. It was a start. The journey was hard. Spring rains had turned the roads to mud, and twice they had to dig the wagon out, all 3 of them covered in muck and exhausted by the time they got it moving again. They slept under the stars most nights, Clara wrapped in blankets in the wagon bed, while Ethan and Daniel took turns keeping watch. Clara's wound still bothered her, and some nights Ethan would wake to find her clutching her side, her face twisted in pain. But she never complained. She just gritted her teeth and kept going, helping with camp, organizing supplies, learning everything Ethan could teach her about medicine. Daniel hunted for their food, bringing back rabbits, deers, even a wild turkey once. He didn't talk much, but he was reliable, steady, always there when they needed him. They reached Silver Ridge on the 4th day. It was worse than they'd expected, not really a mining camp so much as a collection of tents and shacks clinging to the side of a mountain. The smell hit them before they even entered the settlement. Sickness, death, human waste. A man approached the wagon, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. "You the doctor?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I am," Ethan said. "Thank heaven. We've lost 12 people in the last week. Another 20 are sick, maybe more. We didn't know what to do. We sent word to Millridge, but we didn't think anyone would actually come." Ethan climbed down from the wagon, grabbed his medical bag. "Show me the sick." They set up in the largest tent, clearing out space and laying down clean canvas. Ethan worked through the night, examining patients, diagnosing dysentery caused by contaminated water. He prescribed treatments, clean water, rest, basic rehydration solutions made from boiled water, salt, and sugar. Clara helped, her movements sure and confident. She cleaned wounds, boiled water, held hands when there was nothing else to do. She spoke to the patients in a way Ethan couldn't, understood their fear because she'd felt it herself. Daniel organized the camp. He found the contaminated water source, a stream downstream from where they were dumping waste, and showed them how to dig a proper latrine away from the water supply. He helped bury the dead with dignity, marking graves with simple wooden crosses. By the end of the first week, the outbreak was under control. They'd lost 3 more people, an old man, a woman in childbirth, a child who'd been too weak to fight, but the rest were recovering. The color was returning to faces. People were sitting up, eating, talking. The camp's foreman tried to pay them. He pressed a small leather pouch into Ethan's hands, heavy with coins. "For saving us," he said. Ethan handed it back. "We didn't come here for money." "Then why did you come?" Ethan looked at Clara, at Daniel, at the people they'd saved, people who were alive because they'd shown up. Because someone had to. The foreman stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You need supplies, food, anything?" "Some dried meat would be good, and oats for the horses." "You'll have it, and more." The foreman paused. "Where are you headed next?" "Wherever we're needed." "There's a settlement about 50 miles north, place called Pine Creek. Heard they had some kind of accident at the mill. Men hurt. Might need a doctor." Ethan nodded. "We'll head there next." They stayed another week in Silver Ridge to make sure everyone was stable, teaching the miners how to keep the water clean, how to recognize signs of illness, how to care for each other. Then they moved on. Pine Creek was next. Then Blackwater. Then a homestead where a family's children had scarlet fever. Then a logging camp where a man had been crushed by a falling tree. Word spread fast on the frontier. There was a doctor traveling the territory, treating anyone who needed it, asking nothing in return. People started seeking them out, flagging down their wagon on remote roads, begging for help. And Ethan gave it. Every time. There were failures, of course. A woman who died in childbirth despite everything Ethan tried. A man with gangrene who'd waited too long to seek help. A child with pneumonia whose lungs were too weak. Each one felt like the soldier in Virginia all over again, a reminder of his limitations, his inadequacy. But Clara was always there, pulling him back from the edge. "You can't save everyone," she'd say, her hand on his shoulder. "I know. But look at what you have saved. The family in Pine Creek, the miners in Silver Ridge, the woman with the infected wound in Blackwater, the man who would have bled out if you hadn't been there." She'd squeeze his shoulder. "You're doing good, Ethan. Don't let the failures make you forget that." Daniel rarely spoke about his grief, but Ethan could see it working its way through him. Slowly, over the months, the raw pain turned into something quieter. Not gone, never gone, but manageable. He threw himself into the work, protecting them, providing for them, making sure they had what they needed. One evening, as they camped by a river, Daniel sat down beside Ethan. The fire crackled between them, and for a long time neither man spoke. "I've been thinking about Thomas," Daniel said finally. "Yeah?" "I used to think that if I found out who killed him, if I saw that person punished, it would fix everything. Like I could just close that chapter and move on. Justice served, case closed." He poked at the fire with a stick, but it didn't work that way. Seeing Mercer hang didn't bring Thomas back. It didn't make the grief go away, didn't make me feel better. No, never does. But this? Daniel gestured around them, the wagon, the supplies, the medical equipment. Helping people, saving lives. It doesn't erase what happened, but it makes it hurt less, makes it mean something. He looked at Ethan. Like maybe Thomas's death wasn't completely meaningless if it led to this, if it led to us being here, doing this. Ethan understood, because he felt the same way about the soldier he'd killed. Every life he saved now didn't erase that death, but it balanced the scale just a little, made the weight easier to carry. "He'd be proud of you," Ethan said. Daniel's eyes glistened in the firelight. "I hope so. I really hope so." Months turned into a year. They established a pattern. Arrive at a settlement, set up a temporary clinic, treat everyone who came, then move on. They never stayed long enough to put down roots, but people remembered them. The doctor who wouldn't turn anyone away. The woman who understood what it was like to be desperate. The hunter who'd lost his brother and found a new purpose. They treated miners with crushed limbs and black lung, homesteaders with infections and broken bones, children with fevers and women in childbirth. They extracted bullets, set fractures, lanced abscesses, delivered babies. They saved lives. Not all of them, but enough. A year after leaving Millridge, they returned. The town had changed. A new sheriff had been elected, one who actually enforced the law fairly. The corrupt merchants had been run out or reformed. Mercer's properties had been seized and sold, the money used to build a schoolhouse and repair the roads. There was still poverty, still struggle, but there was also hope. Something that had been missing before. They set up their clinic in the center of town, and within hours, people were lining up. Not just for medical care, but to say thank you. To tell them how much what they'd done had mattered. To share stories of how things were better now. Marshal Kane visited on the second day. He looked older, more tired, but there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Heard you've been making quite a name for yourselves out there," he said. "Just doing what we can," Ethan replied. "It's more than that. People are talking about you all across the territory. The doctor who wouldn't give up on anyone. You've given people hope. Shown them that someone actually gives a damn. We've just been lucky. Luck's got nothing to do with it. You made a choice, and you stuck with it. That's character." Kane paused, pulled an envelope from his coat. "There's been talk in the territorial government about establishing a real medical system out here. Clinics in every settlement, trained doctors, proper funding. They want to build something permanent. That's good. And your name keeps coming up. They want you to help run it. Consult, at least. Help them figure out how to reach the people who need it most." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not a politician. I'm not a bureaucrat. I'm just a doctor." "That's exactly why they want you. Because you understand what people out here actually need. Because you've been doing it, living it." Kane handed him the letter. "Think about it. You could help a lot more people with the government's resources behind you." Ethan took the letter, folded it, tucked it away. "I'll think about it." That night, he sat with Clara on the porch of Dr. Brennan's clinic. The old doctor had passed away 6 months ago, peacefully in his sleep. He'd left the building to Ethan in his will, along with all his remaining equipment and a note that said simply, "Keep saving lives." "You going to take the government job?" Clara asked. "I don't know. It means settling down, staying in one place, no more traveling, no more going where we're needed most." "Is that such a bad thing?" Ethan looked at her. Over the past year, she'd transformed completely. The haunted, desperate woman he'd pulled from the wreckage was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more sure of herself. She'd learned basic medical care, could stitch wounds and set bones almost as well as he could. She'd also started teaching, showing other women in the settlements how to care for their families, how to recognize signs of illness, how to save lives. She'd found her purpose, her place. "What do you want?" he asked. Clara was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street. "I want a place where people can come when they're hurt or scared, where they won't be turned away because they can't pay or because they don't matter to anyone, where no one is invisible." She looked at the clinic. "I think we could do that here. Use this as a base, train others, send them out to the settlements, build something that lasts longer than we do." Ethan felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope, maybe, or just the possibility of it. The idea that they could build something permanent, something that would continue after they were gone. "You really think we could do that?" "I think we have to try." The decision wasn't immediate. Ethan took a week to think about it, to talk to people, to consider what it would mean. He spoke with Daniel, who admitted he was tired of constantly moving, tired of never having a home base. "I'll keep traveling if you need me to," Daniel said. "But if you're asking what I want to settle down, build something, maybe train other people to do what I've been doing, protecting doctors, guiding them through rough country. We could create a whole network." Ethan spoke with the people who'd helped them over the past year, the merchants who'd donated supplies, the families who'd opened their homes, the other healers and midwives who'd shared their knowledge. They all said the same thing. What he was doing mattered, but it would matter more if it was sustainable, if it could grow beyond just him. Finally, he made his decision. "All right," he said to Clara. "Let's do it. Let's build something that lasts." They spent the next year transforming Brennan's clinic into a full medical center. They expanded the building, adding rooms for patients, a surgical suite, and space for training. They recruited other doctors, young ones mostly, fresh from medical school back east, idealistic and eager to make a difference. They also recruited nurses, midwives, and what Clara called community health workers, people from the settlements who learned basic medical care and took that knowledge back to their communities. And they made it free. No one was turned away. Ever. Funding came from unexpected places. The territorial government provided some, impressed by what they'd accomplished. Wealthy benefactors, inspired by their story, donated more. But most came from the people themselves, farmers, miners, laborers, people who remembered being helped when no one else would. They gave what they could, a few coins here, a sack of grain there. It added up. They established satellite clinics in 6 different settlements, each staffed with a doctor and support staff. They created a system for getting supplies to remote areas, for responding to emergencies, for coordinating care. Daniel ran security and logistics, making sure supplies reached the remote clinics safely, protecting medical staff from bandits and hostile terrain. He recruited others like him, men who'd lost someone, who needed purpose, who wanted to protect instead of destroy. He trained them, organized them, gave them a code to live by. Clara became the heart of the operation. She trained women, organized community health programs, and never ever forgot what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored. Every person who walked through their doors was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they were or where they came from. She also started a program for women specifically, teaching them about their bodies, about childbirth, about how to protect themselves and their children. It was revolutionary for the territory, and some people complained. But Clara didn't care. She just kept doing it. And Ethan? He did what he'd always been meant to do. He saved lives. One patient at a time, one surgery at a time, one choice at a time. He also taught. Young doctors came to learn from him, to watch him work, to understand his philosophy. He was honest with them about his failures, about the soldier he'd killed, about the years he'd spent running. He used his mistakes as lessons, showing them that being a good doctor wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, trying your best, and never giving up on a patient. 3 years after Mercer's execution, Ethan stood in front of the medical center they'd built. It was early morning, the sun just rising over the mountains, painting everything gold. Patients were already arriving. A mother with a sick child, an old man with a broken arm, a young woman about to give birth, a miner with the infected wound. The building itself was simple but solid, made of good timber and stone. Over the door, someone had carved a sign, "All are welcome here." Clara walked up beside him, slipping her hand into his. Over the past 3 years, she'd become more than his partner in work. She'd become his anchor, his compass, his reason for staying when things got hard. They'd never talked about what they were to each other. They didn't need to. It was understood in the way she'd reach for his hand when she had a nightmare, in the way he'd save her the last cup of coffee in the morning, in the way they'd sit together in comfortable silence after a long day, not needing words. "You ever think about that night in the snow?" she asked. "When you pulled me out of the wreck?" "Sometimes." "You think you made the right choice? Saving me?" Ethan looked at the medical center, at the people filing through the doors, at the lives being saved and healed. He thought about the satellite clinics spreading across the territory. He thought about the doctors they'd trained, the people they'd helped. He thought about Daniel, who'd found peace and purpose. He thought about Clara, who'd transformed from a victim into a force of nature. He thought about the soldier he'd killed, about the guilt he'd carried for so long. It was still there. It would always be there. But it had changed. It wasn't a weight dragging him down anymore. It was a reminder, a reason to keep trying, to keep showing up, to keep saving lives. "Yeah," he said. "I think I did." Clara smiled, leaned her head against his shoulder. "Me too." They stood there for a moment longer, watching the day begin. Then, together, they walked inside. There was work to do, lives to save, hope to give, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Hale wasn't running from his past. He was building a future, one where the forgotten weren't forgotten anymore, where the wounded could heal, where mercy wasn't a weakness but a strength, where everyone, rich or poor, powerful or powerless, mattered. In the harshest land, in the coldest territory, they'd built something that mattered. They'd built a place where everyone belonged. Years would pass. The medical network would grow. New clinics would open. New doctors would train. Some would fail. Some would succeed beyond anyone's expectations. People would live who otherwise would have died. And through it all, Ethan would remember that night in the snow. The choice he'd made, the life he'd saved, the path it had set him on. He'd remember that redemption wasn't about erasing your mistakes. It was about what you did after, about choosing over and over again to show up and try. And he'd remember that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back.